On the frozen morning of January 26, 1945, the small Alsatian village of Holzwihr stood silent beneath a heavy winter sky. It had snowed through the night, blanketing the countryside in layers of pale white. Yet beneath that seemingly peaceful stillness, a brutal encounter was about to unfold, one that would leave long-lasting impressions upon every German soldier who witnessed it, and one that would reveal to the Wehrmacht a weapon that had already begun reshaping World War II from the skies to the ground, the American Browning M2.50 caliber machine gun. By early 1945, Germany's situation on the Western Front had deteriorated with alarming speed. The Ardennes offensive, the last major German attempt to break Allied lines, had failed. American forces, reinforced by vast industrial resources and steady manpower, pushed eastward toward the Rhine. German divisions, battered and divided, found themselves increasingly scattered across fragmented front lines, often lacking armor, ammunition, and logistical support. Yet even in exhaustion, German units fought fiercely, clinging to the hope that delaying actions might buy time for political or diplomatic developments. In the region surrounding Holzwihr, remnants of the German 2nd Mountain Division prepared for a counterattack aimed at reclaiming strategic ground lost to the American 3rd Infantry Division. Among them was a young German infantryman being treated in a makeshift aid station housed in the remains of a stone farmhouse. His role in the coming hours would not be heroic, his unit had already suffered losses. But what he would witness from that farmhouse window would stay with him for the rest of his life. He later recalled hearing a deep, rhythmic thunder echoing from the treeline, a sound unlike the sharp cracks of rifles or the rolling percussion of artillery. It was steady, controlled, yet violently powerful. And it came from a single American soldier. That soldier was First Lieutenant Audie Murphy, but to understand how one man and one machine gun could break a German assault numbering more than 200 men supported by armor, one must understand the weapon itself, the Browning M2.50 caliber machine gun. The story of the Browning .50 caliber begins, like many American weapons of the early 20th century, with the work of John Moses Browning, one of history's most prolific and influential firearms designers. Following the bloody trench warfare and lessons learned from World War I, American planners recognized the need for a heavy machine gun capable of neutralizing aircraft, armored vehicles, and fortified infantry positions. Traditional rifle-caliber machine guns, firing .30-06 ammunition, were effective against infantry but lacked the power to penetrate early aircraft and expanding tank armor. The U.S. Army tasked Browning with creating a weapon that bridged the gap between small arms fire and light artillery. The result was the M2 heavy machine gun, officially adopted in 1933 but refined over years of testing. The weapon fired a massive 12.7 by 99 mm cartridge, commonly known as the .50 BMG. Its penetrating power, range, and destructive energy far exceeded anything carried by infantry on the battlefield. The M2 quickly gained a reputation for ruggedness and reliability. Unlike many weapons designed in wartime under rushed conditions, the M2 was engineered methodically, optimized over years of peacetime refinement. By the time America entered World War II in 1941, the Browning .50 caliber stood ready as one of the most reliable heavy machine guns in the world. The U.S. Army Air Forces recognized its potential immediately. While European aircraft designers favored 20 mm or 30 mm cannons, American strategists argued that high-velocity, armor-penetrating .50 caliber rounds, when used in large numbers, could provide equivalent destructive power with greater reliability, less weight, and higher rates of fire. What followed was one of the most important standardizations of the war. American aircraft, tanks, half-tracks, and even trucks would be armed with the same heavy machine gun. The United States would build an entire doctrine of overwhelming firepower around a single weapon. The Germans would feel the consequences of that decision everywhere, from the skies above Stuttgart to the ruined villages of eastern France. To understand the terror the .50 caliber Browning inspired, one must begin in the air. By 1943, the Allied bombing campaign over Germany had intensified dramatically. American planners, unlike their British counterparts, believed firmly in the effectiveness of daylight precision bombing. The Luftwaffe, though still formidable, strained under the immense demand for pilots, aircraft, and fuel. And while German fighters like the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and Focke-Wulf Fw 190 were formidable machines, they faced a new challenge that few pilots anticipated: the overlapping defensive fire of American bombers. On September 6, 1943, the U.S. Army Air Forces launched their first major daylight raid against Stuttgart. More than 380 B-17 flying fortresses roared toward the city in tight combat box formations designed to maximize mutual support. Each bomber bristled with 13.50 caliber Browning machine guns, mounted in flexible, turreted, and cheek positions. To attack a single bomber meant flying into the combined fire of not one weapon, but dozens. Veteran Luftwaffe pilots quickly realized they had miscalculated. The defensive fire from American bombers was not sporadic or inaccurate. It was disciplined, overlapping, and devastating. The deep chatter of synchronized .50 caliber fire filled the air long before cannon shells from German fighters reached the formation, from as far as 1,000 meters. German pilots could see streaks of bright tracers slicing through the sky, yet those visible tracers represented only a fraction of the rounds being fired. For every tracer the Germans saw, there were 4 invisible, full metal jacket projectiles traveling the same deadly path. Heinrich Wormholer, an experienced Luftwaffe pilot flying in Fw 190 that day, later described the experience in haunting terms: "It was like flying into a moving wall of steel. You see the tracers, but those are only 1 in 5, the others, the ones you cannot see, are the ones that kill you." During the Stuttgart raid alone, dozens of German fighters were shot down or damaged beyond repair. Even the most skilled pilots found themselves outmatched by the sheer volume of American defensive fire. This marked a turning point in the air war. Luftwaffe commanders began to warn that frontal assaults, the preferred tactic against bombers, were becoming suicidal. Approaching from the front meant flying into the highest concentration of .50 caliber fire, but it was not just the aircraft of the Wehrmacht that faced this threat. The same weapon that tore apart Luftwaffe fighters would soon devastate German infantry, mechanized units, and defensive formations on the ground. When American ground forces landed in North Africa in late 1942, German commanders expected to face inexperienced troops, poorly trained and poorly equipped. Many believed the Americans, untested in large-scale land warfare, would crumble quickly. But something surprised veteran German officers almost immediately: every American armored vehicle, whether a half-track, a scout car, a Sherman tank, or even a simple supply truck, carried an M2.50 caliber machine gun. The weapon appeared everywhere, mounted on turrets, ring mounts, and pintle sockets. Hans von Luck, a distinguished panzer commander who had fought both the Soviets and the Western Allies, observed this difference firsthand during the Normandy campaign. His experiences left a lasting impression. The Americans compensated for their inexperience with an incredible volume of fire. Their .50 calibers seemed to be everywhere. We could not move in daylight without drawing fire from one of them. Unlike the German army, which relied heavily on rifle-caliber machine guns like the MG-34 and MG-42, the Americans relied on a multi-layered approach to firepower. Rifle squads possessed semi-automatic M1 Garands, providing higher rates of fire than German Kar 98K bolt-action rifles. Platoons carried Browning automatic rifles. And above them all, vehicle-mounted .50 caliber guns provided overwhelming suppressive and destructive fire. Together, these weapons formed a doctrine in which American forces used firepower to compensate for tactical or situational disadvantages. Even inexperienced units, when supported by vehicles equipped with .50 caliber Brownings, could break ambushes, repel counterattacks, or destroy lightly armored vehicles with brutal ease. By 1944, German commanders understood that the Americans were not simply using a heavy machine gun, they were using a philosophy: overwhelm the enemy with sustained, accurate, and relentless fire. All these elements converged to explain why, on that frigid January morning in Holzwihr, a single American lieutenant could hold off more than 200 German soldiers with armor support. Audie Murphy was already known for his courage before the events of January 26. But what he accomplished that day would elevate him into the ranks of the most decorated soldiers of the entire war, when German forces launched their counterattack. Murphy ordered his company to fall back to prepared defensive positions. He remained at the front, directing artillery fire through a field telephone while positioned atop a burning M10 tank destroyer. Enemy rounds struck the vehicle. Flames erupted around him. Ammunition began to cook off, detonating sporadically as the heat intensified. Yet Murphy climbed onto the turret, seized the mounted .50 caliber machine gun, and opened fire. For more than an hour, he alone held the line, cutting down German infantry as they advanced through the smoke. He knocked out crew-served weapons, halted armored vehicles, and forced entire squads to retreat. The Germans, stunned by the volume and accuracy of his fire, believed they were facing multiple machine guns, not a single man. By the time Murphy finally withdrew, he had inflicted more than 50 casualties, disrupted the entire German attack, and allowed his company to retake their positions. To many German survivors of the 2nd Mountain Division, it was not only Murphy's bravery that left an impression. It was the weapon he wielded, the Browning M2.50 caliber, in the hands of one determined soldier, had decisively broken their assault. August 1943, the Third Reich still controlled vast stretches of Europe, from the Atlantic Wall to the outskirts of Leningrad, from Norway's fjords to the deserts of North Africa. But beneath the surface of this seemingly unstoppable war machine, something was beginning to crack. A silent weakness. An invisible shift that only a few sharp-eyed commanders sensed forming like a storm on the horizon. Germany was fighting too many battles in too many places. Its industries were straining. Its pilots were exhausted. And its enemies, particularly in the West, were changing their strategy. The skies over Europe, once dominated by the Luftwaffe, were becoming contested territory. And at the center of this turning tide stood General Adolf Galland, one of the most respected, and outspoken, aces of the Luftwaffe. A man who had shot down dozens of enemy aircraft. A man with a reputation for telling the truth even when the truth was unwelcome. A man who understood that wars are not won by confidence or ideology, but by machines, tactics, logistics, and brutal realism. In the summer of 1943, Galland made a prediction so alarming, so unbelievable, that most of the German high command dismissed it as nonsense. He warned, the Americans will be able to escort their bombers all the way to Berlin. To Hermann Göring, Reichsmarschall, commander of the Luftwaffe, these words were impossible. Outrageous. Almost insulting, but Galland was right. At the beginning of the war, the Luftwaffe was the world's most advanced and battle-tested air force. It had crushed Poland, smashed Western Europe, dominated the skies over the Balkans, and terrorized the Soviet Union. Its aircraft, like the Bf-109 and Fw-190, were world-class fighters. Its pilots were among the best on Earth, but by 1943, things were different. Germany was no longer fighting quick campaigns. It was fighting a war of endurance against enemies with deeper industrial resources. The United States had entered the war, and the Americans were producing planes like a factory produces shoes. Their pilots were well trained. Their aircraft powerful, and their bombers enormous. Every month, more and more B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 Liberators arrived in England. And they were heading toward Germany. The Americans believed in daylight strategic bombing, hitting industries, ball-bearing plants, aircraft factories, and oil refineries while the sun was up. This allowed them to aim more precisely, and therefore, theoretically, deal more economic damage, but the Luftwaffe began tearing American formations apart. The American commanders had a rule: our heavy bombers can protect themselves. This rule was stubbornly believed at the highest levels. In theory, hundreds of B-17s flying in tight formations could create a shield of machine gun fire powerful enough to push back enemy fighters. The formations were called combat boxes, and they looked like vast steel fortresses moving across the sky, hence the bomber's famous nickname. But Galland understood something the Americans did not, something even some German commanders overlooked: bombers alone do not win air wars. Fighters do, and the Americans had a flaw: their fighters could not yet escort their bombers deep into Germany. The P-47 Thunderbolt had incredible firepower and durability, but its range was limited. The P-51 Mustang, destined to change the war, hadn't yet entered widespread service. The P-38 Lightning could go farther, much farther, but only under certain conditions. Most Luftwaffe leaders didn't think this mattered. Galland did. He understood that if American fighters ever found a way to escort their bombers all the way to the target and back, then Germany's industrial heartland, its factories, refineries, and infrastructure, would be in mortal danger. In early 1943, he began warning Göring that this was coming, but Göring didn't believe him. Every morning, Luftwaffe intelligence delivered thick stacks of reports to the command staff. Reconnaissance photos, captured documents, pilot debriefings, intercepted radio communications. Most officers skimmed through them. Galland didn't. He read everything, line by line, looking for patterns, and in the summer of 1943, he found one: American escort fighters, especially the P-38 Lightning, were appearing farther from the English Channel than they should have been. They were being sighted near Bremen, near Hanover, areas once considered too deep inside Germany for American fighters to reach safely. Something wasn't adding up. Luftwaffe pilots were reporting encounters with P-38s at ranges previously considered impossible. Some pilots even claimed they had chased these aircraft only to find them mysteriously refusing to break off the pursuit, almost as if their fuel tanks were bottomless. Most commanders dismissed these as exaggerations, or the fog of war, or simple misidentification. But Galland saw the truth behind the chaos. The Americans were experimenting with drop tanks, external fuel tanks that could be jettisoned when empty. This concept wasn't new, but the Americans were using it aggressively and effectively, far more so than Germany had predicted, and that changed everything. With drop tanks, fighters like the P-38 could fly much deeper into Europe. There were still limitations: weather sensitivity, performance at high altitude, but their range was increasing rapidly. Galland realized that Germany was facing something unprecedented: an enemy who could bomb deep into the Reich, and soon have fighter protection. The entire way, this was the nightmare scenario. One humid morning in August 1943, Galland was summoned to a conference at Carenhall, Göring's luxurious forest estate outside Berlin. Carenhall was the symbol of Göring's power: gold-plated furniture, hunting trophies, rare paintings stolen from across Europe. The Reichsmarshal wanted to discuss the air defense situation. Galland arrived with a folder full of intelligence reports. He didn't come to flatter Göring, he came to warn him. Inside the meeting room, senior Luftwaffe generals gathered. Maps were displayed on long tables. Pins marked bomber routes. Papers covered strategic losses and upcoming operations. Göring entered with theatrical flair. He was dressed in a pale blue uniform, weighed down by medals. His presence filled the room, not because of respect, but because everyone knew that Göring's moods could determine careers. Galland waited his turn. When asked about the American threat, he didn't sugarcoat it. Reichsmarschall, the Americans will soon be able to escort their bombers all the way to the target and back. Göring frowned. Impossible, he said dismissively. No fighter can fly that far. Galland opened his folder. He spread out reports showing P-38 sightings deep inside Germany. He displayed reconnaissance photos of dropped tanks. He presented pilot testimonies. Göring shook his head. This is propaganda. Exaggeration. Nonsense. Galland leaned forward. The Americans are extending their range faster than we predicted. If they achieve full escort coverage, our bomber interceptions will collapse. The Reich's industries will be exposed. Göring's voice turned sharp. The P-38 is a twin-engine monster. It is too heavy to fight our 109s and 190s. And even with these tanks you speak of, it cannot go to Berlin and back. Galland didn't back down. It doesn't need to go to Berlin today. It just needs to go a little farther each month. And it is. The room fell quiet. Several officers shifted nervously. Everyone knew Galland was one of Germany's best tacticians. But contradicting Göring directly was dangerous. Göring's face darkened. General Galland, he said, I will not have defeatism in this room. Galland remained calm but firm. This is not defeatism. This is reality. The tension was suffocating. Finally, Göring waved his hand. The Americans will never escort their bombers to the heart of the Reich. It's impossible. But Galland knew what Göring could not accept, that the Luftwaffe no longer controlled the skies, the truth Germany ignored. After the meeting, Galland walked out of Karen Hall deeply frustrated. The Luftwaffe was losing pilots. It was losing fuel. It was losing production capacity. And now, it was losing time. Göring's refusal to face reality was not just arrogance, it was fatal. Galland returned to his headquarters and began preparing contingency plans, redistributing fighter units, reorganizing day fighter defenses, prioritizing training, demanding urgent upgrades to aircraft range, pushing for accelerated jet development, calling for more aggressive interceptions, but without Göring's support, his hands were tied. Meanwhile, American engineers and strategists were pushing relentlessly forward. Factories were producing thousands of drop tanks. Pilots were practicing deep penetration missions. The P-38 was receiving improvements. And the P-51 Mustang, Germany's future nightmare, was undergoing rapid development. Inside the Reich, however, many leaders still clung to an outdated assumption: Germany is too far from England for fighters to escort bombers to the heartland. It was a comforting belief. A belief Galland knew would soon be shattered, and in the skies over Europe, the first cracks were already showing. To many Luftwaffe pilots, the P-38 Lightning was a strange aircraft, large, twin-engined, with its distinctive twin booms and central cockpit. Some German pilots underestimated it. Others respected it. Galland paid special attention to it. The Lightning had several advantages: longer range than most American fighters, excellent high-altitude performance, heavy armament concentrated in the nose, twin engines offering redundancy over long distances, but it also had weaknesses, especially in cold, high-altitude European conditions. Still, Galland understood something essential. If the P-38 could escort bombers deep into Germany, then future aircraft, especially the upcoming P-51, would do even better. To him, the P-38 was not the final threat, it was the first sign of the storm. Within months, Galland's prediction would come true. Deep inside Allied planning rooms, American commanders were designing missions that would push fighters farther and farther. Drop tank technology was improving. Fuel management techniques were evolving. The P-38 was becoming more reliable. Meanwhile, Göring was praising victories that didn't exist. His denial infected the entire Luftwaffe command structure. Many officers mirrored his optimism just to avoid political consequences. Galen knew this was suicidal. He once wrote, "One of the greatest enemies of the Luftwaffe was not the enemy in the air, but the lies we told ourselves." In August 1943, he was perhaps the only high-ranking German officer willing to publicly admit what was coming, but Göring had the final word, and Göring said, "Impossible." History would prove him tragically wrong.